Welcome to the OnScript podcast, your home for world-class conversations on scripture and theology, where you get to meet some of the best in the field. Visit us at onscript.study. Say hello on Twitter at OnScriptPodcast and stop by our Facebook page at facebook.com/OnScript.
Hey everyone, welcome back to OnScript. This is Matt Lynch coming to you from Regent College in Vancouver. I want to say a quick thanks to Jason Stark and Taylor Turzek who produce this podcast. Without their help, we'd be sunk. So we're so grateful for both of them. Also, if you're able to share the word about what we're doing here, I've given ideas for that in previous episodes, but you can also give us a rating or review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. And we hope you enjoy this episode.
Hello, friends. Welcome to OnScript. This is Amy Hughes, a co-host for the podcast with Matt Lynch, Matt Bates, Aaron Heim, Drew Johnson, Chris Tilling, and Jules Martinez Olivieri. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Daniela Augustine, reader in World Christianity and Pentecostal Studies at the University of Birmingham in the UK, and professor of theological ethics at Lee University. She serves as co-editor of the T&T Clark Systematic Pentecostal and Charismatic Theology series, and as associate editor of the Journal of Pentecostal Theology. Her areas of academic research include theological ethics, public theology, ecclesiology, pneumatology, and liturgical theology. I'll let her kind of work out some of those for you after we do this introduction. She is the author of many publications, including Pentecost Hospitality and Transfiguration, Toward a Spirit-Inspired Vision of Social Transformation, published in 2012, and The Spirit of the Common Good, Shared Flourishing in the Image of God, published by Eerdmans in 2019. She served for almost a decade as the leader of the Christian Ethics Interest Group for the Society of Pentecostal Studies and presently co-chairs the Orthodox Pentecostal Academic Dialogue. Most recently, Daniela is the co-author, along with another OnScript alum, Chris Green, of a book called Politics of the Spirit, Pentecostal Reflections on Public Responsibility and the Common Good, that came out last year. The book we'll be talking about today is The Spirit of the Common Good, Shared Flourishing in the Image of God, which received the 2020 Pneuma Book of the Year Award. I am so grateful for this book and so delighted to introduce it to you all. This book is a perfect example of theology helping us to parse large, complex, weighty issues with high stakes. How we engage with violence in our world, how we live with one another as neighbors, how we move forward together in the Spirit as a Christian community in a broken and war-torn world. These are books that show what theology, and specifically pneumatology, is capable of. I'm excited for you all to hear from Daniela today and to talk about this book. Welcome, Daniela.
Thank you very much for having me, Amy. It's a pleasure.
Could you start us off today by telling us a bit about your journey into theology? Is there a moment or two that stands out as being particularly formative for you?
I come from the East, Eastern Europe. I grew up under communism, in the midst of militant, atheist, oppressive, totalitarian regime. And I come from a family of intellectual dissidents who were persecuted for their dissidency. They were not necessarily religious, but they had a good theological intuition because they saw in the Bible a dissident text. They saw the scriptures as a subversive, radically subversive text that is also liberating to the socio-political imagination. And I witnessed as a child many discussions surrounding particularly eschatology. You can imagine fascination with the end times, and particularly because nothing perhaps can compare with the death sentence pronounced over the regimes and the kingdoms of this earth as the advent of the kingdom of God at the end of time. So everything else shall pass away, including communism. And that was the message that they saw in that particular text. Of course, it was also peppered with a lot of speculations that were enchanting and propped brought forth my curiosity. I wanted to probe all of that. I wanted to get into it. But I don't think that that was precisely what conditioned me or primed me for theology. I think it was the encounter of the divine presence of the mystery of God's presence. Perhaps one of the key events was at the age of 11, witnessing the fight for life in the cancer-ridden body of my friend, and then witnessing her healing after the two of us were baptized out of our own free will, secretly baptized in an Orthodox monastery in the mountains. Of course, it was against the law to baptize children. It was against the law also to conduct any form of catechism. So I wasn't properly catechized by any means. But the priest felt the burden of his vocation. He shut the doors of the monastery's church, and with trembling hands, he baptized us. And the next thing that we knew, she was healed. She was completely, totally, entirely healed. So I was marked by this event. I wanted to know God in ways in which my environment, my setting could not provide. And I felt deeply drawn to theology. It called me, it was calling me forth. We have in the East this understanding in Eastern Christianity that one doesn't learn theology. Theology is a gift. It's a charismatic gift. It's a gift of the Spirit that's given to individuals in the midst of the community of faith, and to the community of faith as a whole, because these individuals are part of that gift to the community. So in a way, theology chooses us. We don't choose it. It calls us, it summons us, and we have to show up and make ourselves available to it. John Meindorf has this articulation of theology as an internal vision of God. And the church beholds this vision, and it's compelled by the Spirit to become what it beholds. So that's the function, the ecclesial function of theology and the voice of theology. In a way, I think theology chose me. And especially potently, it came forth as a vocation in the midst of the persecuted church coming out of this persecution in 1988, 1989. And by the way, just recently, we remembered the fall of the Berlin Wall again, right, in November. And that partitioning of the world collapsing before our eyes in the most unexpected way. No one really expected that it will happen. And I remember the church coming out from her underground dwelling to the public square, and the church was immediately in the process of this transition. It's immediately on the square, protesting oppression and standing for the human rights of all of society. It wasn't holding posters for freedom of religion. It was holding posters for freedom of humanity.
Ooh, that's a whole word right there.
Yes. So, speaking about the event that marks you, I wanted to get to the bottom of it all. What made those people stand in solidarity with the suffering, with the oppressed, of all spaces, all marginalities, all all segments of society, and to be willing to take the blow, to be willing to become martyrs, because it was scary in the beginning, and one should have been willing to lay down their life for freedom in the initial process of transition. And yet they were there, ready to die for the well-being, for the flourishing of all. And of course, that catches you, it doesn't let you go. So I was forever marked by that fascination and that lived experience of transition. And no question, it is one of the reasons why I spend so much time and continue to look for the development, towards the development of theology of transformation, socio-political and economic transformation.
What a story. I just can imagine that moment in a monastery, the doors shut, and what an astounding, I mean, as a scholar of early Christianity, it sounds so familiar in so many ways.
It is so good that you're saying, as a scholar of early Christianity, because when I was looking at that bruised, wounded church coming out of persecution, I was reminded of Eusebius describing the bishops limping on their way to Nicaea, right, and to the royal banquet. And this is how I saw the church coming, and the beauty of its wounds.
Yeah.
But it wasn't, Tertullian, the seats, the both of the martyrs is the seats of the church. This was the blood of these martyrs were the seeds of the freedom of all humanity.
We could talk about that all day.
Yes.
So your book, The Spirit of the Common Good, shared flourishing in the image of God. So I think some of what you just said there, I mean, I can see that in your work of the common good, not just the good of these people, but the common book, common good of all people, I mean, the image of God. I assume that much of what you just said is part of the prompting of why you wrote that book. But what was the more sort of immediate context of why you wrote that book?
So in 2011 and 2012, I found myself in Eastern Slavonia. And for those who are not familiar, that's the region where the borders of Croatia, Bosnia, and Serbia come together. And it was the most contested region during what became known as the Third Balkan War in the 1990s. And what I saw was startling. The pavement and the buildings were all covered with the holes of the shrapnels still. They were kept almost like monuments. There we forget what happened to us. And they were sort of indicative of what was happening to the souls, to the psyche of the people in the region. Because indeed, in this place, the war took its most savage, its most barbaric form, with the destruction of the city of Vukovar, with the mass graves of innocent victims that were the casualties of nationalist fueled rhetoric of hatred of the other. And in the midst of all of that, as strange as it sounds, though this was the territory of the deadliest battles, the most horrific crimes against humanity, one would think that they're so engraved in the memory of the people that the region would display in perpetuity the divisions, that ethnic divisions and strifes. But instead of that, at the end of the war, this was precisely the region that experienced the most successful process of peaceful reintegration. So, of course, my curiosity was triggered by that fact. I wanted particularly to see if there was any redemption for religion in the process, because in the beginning of the conflict, the religion played a central role in fueling hatred towards the ethnic and particularly the religious other. Because in the conflict, we had Bosnian Muslims, the Serbian Orthodox, and Croat Catholics. And though the ethnography is rather similar, in fact, as the famous BBC correspondent to Central Europe, who actually was on the Balkans and was reporting on the war, Misha Glenny, commented, those who were killed and who did the killing, they were virtually of the same ethnos. They were kin. They were kin. And he critiqued and analyzed in a critical note the description of the war as an ethnic conflict, precisely because of that kinship. Instead of that, he brought forth that proposal, that suggestion that because this unprecedented barbarism that he has never seen as a war correspondent anywhere else is precisely because of the kinship, of the sense that there is a fratricide at work, that everyone who does the killing is killing their brothers and sisters, and the unsettling feeling of that sense of kinship with those savages on the other side of the war line. And because of that, there was also this practice that emerged of literally effacing one's enemy, literally mutilating the face of the other. Because if one looked closely, they saw themselves. So I was wondering, can religion be redeemed? Could it be that religion actually was not just an agent of conflict and violence and hatred, but also of peace? And so I was looking at the agency of religious community towards peace building in the region. And it was very interesting because there was a 1993 report, which comes relatively early in the war, that was conducted by representatives of the Council of the Churches of Britain and Ireland, who were visiting Serbia and Croatia during the war. So they emphasized the peace building agency of small marginal communities and churches that were actually dismissed prior to that or even persecuted. And among them stood the Pentecostal community of East Slavonia, which is, it seems statistically insignificant, demographically insignificant, around 700 people at the time. But they became an extraordinary agent of facilitating peace, communication between warring sides. They even brokered exchange of prisoners of war, created safe ecumenical space for all sides to come together and to discuss, to daydream together the possibility of peace. And so I wanted to get to the bottom of that and to see how did they do that. And in the process, I started interviewing everyone else about the Pentecostal community. I didn't want to hear from the Pentecostals. I know Pentecostals we have this lovely tradition of testimonies, but I didn't want to hear Pentecostals speaking good things about themselves. I wanted to hear what everyone else had to say about Pentecostals. So I conducted over 30 interviews with Muslims, with Orthodox, with Catholics, and the stories, the amazing stories that came out of that, some of which are in the epilogue. I try to collate in some way in the epilogue of the book, were the reason why I wrote this whole book and engaged the various theological trajectories within it.
And I know from your work before this book that you already had a whole sort of theology of Pentecost. You write kind of in the beginning of your book about how that spirit of Pentecost, it condemns these larger spirits of racism, sexism, tribalism, ethnocentrism, nationalism, as you call it, manifestations of sin's fracturing and antagonizing of the human community. But Pentecost announces God's judgment upon these social pathologies and upon all attempts for their religious justification. They have no future, for in the divinely ordained relational sacramentality of the cosmos, there is no future, no eschaton without the other. So I see this particular theology, this particular niche that was really called in this moment, just sort of exploded even among a small group of people. And that you bring that into in your first chapter. I mean, you briefly mentioned it a moment ago, and talking about what people would do in facing one another. Entwined with the theology of Pentecost is like work on creation, theological anthropology on the image, and Christology. Would you expound a little bit more on what you call the theology of the face? And then I'll ask you after that about kind of iconoclasm as kind of the... Yeah.
Well, this is a big theme that permeates all of the book. I carry it from the beginning to the end. In fact, the whole book, The Spirit and the Common Good, is a theology of the face, in a way. So indeed, that image, that explanation that Misha Glini gives us, prompted a lot of that searching of such a theology. And from there came the assertion that stewarding, recognizing, discerning the common image, the shared image of God in all humanity is foundational, is the beginning of a commitment, making a commitment to a common good. One has to learn to discern the face of God in the face of the other. As a shared humanity, to recognize it, to own it, to steward it. This is the foundation of mutual safekeeping. And in order to commit to each other's future as a shared future. So the first common good that is given to humanity is the common image, is the foundation of all common good. And there is a lot that I can say here, including the function of the other in our lives as a point, the encounter of the other as the point of ethical awakening. This comes, of course, from Emmanuel Levinas. And the way in which he speaks about the nakedness of the face, which also reminds us of what was transpiring, right, in that conflict. The nakedness of the face that summons us to responsibility. So that cannot be ignored. It calls us forth to mutual safekeeping. And without that recognition, we cannot become oneself with the other. So Christian pneumatology makes this bold assertion that in that process of discernment, of our eyes being opened anew for the humanity of the other and for the shared image beneath the veneer of otherness, ethnic, racial, cultural, etc., otherness. Beneath that, the Spirit opens our eyes to recognize the common image, the shared image, and to grasp and once again be grasped by wonder as we recognize that image as the face of God in a primordial memory of paradise. And in that sense, I see humanity as a paradise-haunted creature that knows deeply, needs God, that the world can be better. It can be better because it has this primordial memory of what the world is supposed to be. And in that memory, as shalom, as a comprehensive flourishing, that is manifested in no essential relationships that constitute humanity. The relationship with God, with the fellow human, and with all of the rest of creation, the non-anthropic other, the earth itself. In that memory of shalom, humanity remembers its face as the face of God, its own face as the face of God, because as it is beautifully and eloquently depicted in the Eastern Orthodox icon of the creation of humanity, when Adam opens his eyes, when Eve opens her eyes, they see as in a mirror their own face in the face of God. And that face of God, through the humanity's living memory of the God in flesh, Jesus Christ, is precisely the face of Christ. So in the way in which in Matthew 25, Christ looks at us to the face of the marginalized, of those in prison, of the homeless, of the impoverished, of the hungry, of the naked. In the same way, also, when we look at the face of the other, we see the face of Christ. And one of the things that here is appropriate to mention is Mother Teresa's response when she was asked, why are you doing all of that? Why are you gathering the sick and the dying from the streets of Calcutta? Her response is, because in doing so, I minister to Christ in his most distressful disguise. So the presence and the nearness of the other can distress us, as a fear of death. Because the other can come to us as the enemy, even our neighbor, as in that war, the closest neighbor turns to be the enemy, turns to be the one who rapes my wife, who beheads my child, who mocks me as they mutilate my body. And yet I'm compelled to see in them their humanity and to help them recover it. And that's what this community was doing, rehumanizing us all.
Yes. And, you use the language of iconoclasm, an iconoclasm of violence, which, of course, icon being image, right, of the sort of the destruction or the distortion, the destruction or mutilation of the image, where the cross is an iconoclasm. The destruction that we visit upon one another is iconoclasm. And you talk about this movement in your next chapter, from that iconoclasm of violence to the life of love, shaped by the new creation. You've talked a lot about kind of that moment of creation in the garden where Adam and Eve open their eyes and see themselves in the face of God, and sort of the new creation that comes through Christ. And this is where I'm going to ask you to read. So it was on that page 85. So this chapter pushes us as readers to reckon with the effects of evil and violence, that it's not merely an abstract exercise. And I think we've already established pretty much by our conversation how that is definitely the case. It's not abstract. Our humanity is on the line. And so if you wouldn't mind, I'd love for you to read a portion of this chapter, and then you can expand on it as you see fit.
Yeah, so the paragraph that I believe you have in mind, which is on page 84, reads as follows. Apart from the Spirit's generous, hospitable spaciousness, that enlarges humanity, cultivating it as a Eucharistic communal being. Society's anxiety about scarcity, driven by the undergirding fear of death, faces the other as an unwelcomed intruder into a desperately finite, claustrophobic world. This distorted vision of the other, desensitized to the Spirit's groaning for the renewal of creation and blinded by moral amnesia of the divine face, eventually justifies the logic that, due to nature's material limitations, it is unavoidable for one's life to become a function of another's death. Driven by a malformed instinct of self-preservation, humanity faces the other not in the sacramental call to communion, but in the dehumanizing iconoclasm of violence. The face of the other is no longer a summoning encounter unto life eternal, but a marker of potential competition for life within the drama of the universe, temporality and finiteness. The one who was made to be a co-sharer in the gift of life has become associated with the nearness of death. In light of humanity's communal nature, however, the destruction of the other is nothing less than self-destruction. As one acts in predatory effacement of the other, one ceases to be truly human. So there is a lot going on here, and it also shows what I mentioned earlier, that this theme of the mutual safekeeping after recognizing of the shared humanity, the shared image of God as the ground for all common good, right? That is carried further throughout the book, but maybe I'll give a little bit of context to this passage. And it is that humanity in the fall loses its sight of the world, what it truly is supposed to be, an Eucharist, a means of communion with God and the fellow human and the non-anthropic other. So humanity loses the sense of the world as a cathedral, as a sanctuary, filled to its boundaries, to its fullest with the divine presence. And therefore, the vision of all life as an act of worship, and in which humanity is a co-celebrant together with all of the rest of God's creatures. And as this vision is lost, what settles in is that transition from Eden, the proto-sanctuary, the proto-holy of holies, the place of abundance, of access to life to the fullest, to a world of scarcity beyond the boundaries of Eden. And in the process, humanity also forfeits its priestly essence as homo adorans, as a worshipping creature, that is to stand in the divine presence, bringing forth all of creation, with itself all of creation, all of the world's materiality, bringing it before God in the Spirit. So instead of that, humanity is plagued now with fear. It has lived in that world that is love made matter. Everything, love vibrating in the very fibers of the world, because God is love and because that's his creation. So creation, the act of creation, is not only seeing love in action, is seeing love becoming matter. And instead of that, the antithetical thing to love, fear of scarcity, as fear of death, fear of one's survival. These are the circumstances in which everyone else becomes a threat for one's survival, because the world is viewed as finite, and therefore there is only so much to go around and to be shared. And yet the world is our lifeline. So humanity devours the world exiting Eden, tries to get more and more of the world for itself. And the paradox and the tragedy of the fall of humanity is that as humanity devours the world, it devours what stands between itself and death. It devours its lifeline. In a way, it eats unto death. It devours the world unto death, and in the process devours itself. So this is where the whole idea of the other as a competitor and or distorted vision of the other comes forth in this paragraph. But also, let me throw here something else. Kirill Neshev, a Bulgarian philosopher, also looking at Jürgen Habermas's work on the significance of utopian thought, is saying that the 19th century discovery of the finiteness of the universe basically is the prelude to the ecological crisis, to the destruction and the dismembering of one's ecosphere, and in the process being a detriment to oneself as well, destroying humanity itself. And he says that this is because of the exhaustion of what Habermas calls exhaustion of utopic energies. So the utopic energies of humanity fuel sociopolitical imagination, sociopolitical daydreaming, seeing an opening in the historical horizon, looking for a better sociopolitical and economic system that actually accommodates flourishing and not a slower, sometimes faster death of us all. And a system that affirms and uplifts our humanity and does not transforms us, doesn't barbarize us, doesn't make us into monsters to one another. And so I believe, and this is something that I did also in Pentecost Hospitality and Transfiguration, I laid the foundation for that. That the Holy Spirit is that engine of daydreaming. That daydreaming with the Spirit is essential, it is mandatory for our sociopolitical imagination.
Because the other is so exhausted.
Right, exactly.
and it
So
has limits. It has limits.
Exactly.
No matter how much we daydream about our socio-political structure. Oh, this system of economy, the market, the this, the that, the this, it all doesn't do what we know is possible. And so we get frustrated and exhausted.
Yeah, exactly. It's pushing against the limits. And as I also point out in the book, in the wisdom of God, there are limits placed in the materiality of the cosmos so that they can secure ecological justice, right? These limits are essential for our survival. So human justice becomes a function of providing ecological justice, right? And speaking about the limits of the economy, I mean, growth, economic growth, how far can you go with economic growth? And then it is the devastation of the entire ecosphere and not leaving anything decent, not leaving a good common good for the next generations.
And exploiting more and more people in order to gain more and more profit or more and more, feeding more into a structure and taking more and more from others. Because this idea of scarcity is it's the nightmare that runs the system, that we can't all have all the things. We can't all flourish. So some of us, right? Like that's the idea. Like some people, and which is very different than the Spirit's imagination. You call it, you talk about Eucharistic consciousness, where in the economy of God, there's flourishing for all, there's nourishment and sustaining
Yes.
for all. And that this God's life for the world, it doesn't abandon the world to this system. Not like, well, you deserve it because you chose it.
Right.
But God's like, no. I mean, you did choose it, but I'm not going to let you go.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. It's the economics of the spirit are very perplexing to the mind that is committed to the unleashing of the free markets, neoliberal capitalist logic, right? Where everything is commodifiable, including our bodies, our organs. Right, everything has a price tag. Everything is commodifiable. One's life is expected to be a function of the exploitation and destruction of the bodies of others. Right. So it's a very unsettling, very dissident perspective of the economics of the household of God, where everyone has a place to the table, at the table, and where there is access to life and mutual safekeeping and protection of the flourishing of the other. But again, as you pointed out, and as I speak about that Eucharistic logic that counteracts the market logic, it comes back to the regained vision of the true essence and nature of the world as a gift to be shared Eucharistically in reverent consumption with the fellow human and the non-anthropic other. Here, Dimitrios Staniloa's dialogue of the gift is very instructive, that we receive the world as a gift from God, and we daily offer it back to God in gratitude, knowing that we don't have anything from ourselves to offer to God.
Yeah.
So we give back the world, and in this exchange, forth and back, between God and ourselves, the world becomes a means of communion that brings us closer to God and facilitates our transformation, our transfiguration, properly said, into the divine likeness. So in a sense, the Spirit opens our eyes, resensitizes us to the Eucharistic nature of the world, to the sacrament of the other in our presence, to the responsibility for the other, to the world as a pedagogy on becoming like God, and its Eucharistic essence as the centerpiece of that pedagogy. God shares himself with the other in the act of creation, and particularly the creation of humanity, but in general in the creation. As I point out in the prologue of John, of the Gospel of John, we see God making space for the other in the different, the act of creation as God making space for the other in that trialogue that is going on, in which the words become matter. So in the same way, so God creates the world as a home for humanity, in order for humanity to learn through that Eucharistic essence of the world to present itself as a home for the other, enlarged by the divine spaciousness, right? Humanity presenting itself as a tabernacle for God. The absolute other is enlarged by the hospitality and generosity of the Spirit to welcome all others. And that's the missing link. That's the missing link.
And it's not just, what people can do or the function that they offer, right? Because this God, you've mentioned, you've included, as rightly you should, the non-anthropic other, the world around us, the animals around us, nature around us, And I just think of this God who is delighted by a cavern that maybe one person will see, but that is just magnificently beautiful in the minerals and the shine that it does when a flashlight hits it. And it's just sort of something that existed there for, millions of years and nobody had seen it. The delight of God in animals engaging with one another, the excessiveness of wildflowers just taking over mountains, and how it's just everywhere we look, creation is a pedagogy of creation, of this is how God operates in spaciousness, that he brings us to wide places, where most of our systems, and I get why, but most of our systems are presume limitation. They presume that we're going to step on each other's toes all the time. And to be fair, we do, because we live in a broken relationship with God and with one another and with the world. I want to ask you a few more questions, but I do want to do our speed round right now.
Oh boy.
So, on-script listeners know that you don't know what these questions are ahead of time. So just your immediate response. So these are quick, these are fast. So let's do it. Are you a morning or a night person?
I'm a night person by necessity. Yes.
All right. If you got to hang out for a day with any theologian, living or dead, who would it be?
I think I'll go back to one of the Cappadocians. Especially, I don't know, this would be very difficult because I love them all. But Gregory of Nazianzus is the poet of the Trinity. And was called the theologian, speaking about who is the theologians, and there are only three in the Eastern tradition, right? So if I want to hang with one of them, it would be Gregory of Nazianzus because of his poetry on the Trinity.
Yes. So beautiful. I love his prayers as well. What do you do to relax?
Oh boy. My coping mechanism with stress is walking. I'm an European, so I'm pedestrian at soul. I need to walk, to hike, to move outdoors somewhere, and that's the most relaxing thing. And I love listening to music, classical music and jazz.
Oh, wonderful.
Will do.
What superpower do you wish you had?
Boy, if I was selfish, I would say I want to fly. But as an ethicist, I'm not allowed to be selfish. So I want to heal. I want to heal. I want to heal everything that I touch, everything that I see.
Oh, that's good.
Very different than I think if I was a well-developed entrepreneur, I want to be like King Midas, everything that I touch to turn into gold. But you remember how King Midas ended, right?
Yeah, it didn't go so well.
His food became unedible. So we are doing the same to the world as a continuation of the previous topic.
Tea or coffee?
I love coffee. Brittany's place of tea. I'm not allowed now to have both, so I just smell them in the morning when my husband makes his cup of coffee. I go around it like a cat and smell the coffee.
What place in the world have you never been but would love to visit?
I think I would love to find myself somewhere in Asia, perhaps the Himalayas. Somewhere in the Himalayan mountains. I'm not sure I will ever be able to do that, but it would be interesting to see how the world looks, not from the sky, but from the top of such a mountain.
Yeah. That is actually one place I've been, in the Annapurnas, in the the Annapurna section of the Himalayan range, and it's as astounding as you could possibly imagine. What is your comfort movie or show?
Oh boy, I have been through a lot. And the degree of comfort eventually turns into dissatisfaction. So I cannot say that I have one show that I go back to. I don't know. There is my work on language. We can get to that in a moment, like language as hospitality. There is a children's show in Bulgarian, like 6 episodes. If I'm really hurting, I put it on. And it's old and black and white, and I have seen it multiple times. But it is helping me to get in touch with my childhood, and that's a place of mending. That's a place of healing. Otherwise, I have sat through the good place until I was exasperated. Yeah, and as a movie, I really don't know, Amy, what to tell you.
That's all right. I like the Bulgarian kids show answer. That's pretty good,
Yes.
actually. What are we not talking about in theology spaces that we really need to be talking about in theology spaces?
I think we are scared to improvise and harmonize with the spirit because we lose control. And it's a very challenging enterprise. It's not enough to talk pneumatology. The key answer would have been, well, pneumatology in relation to theological ethics, and this is why I'm doing what I'm doing. But there is more to it. This daydreaming with the spirit, making theology out loud by presenting yourself as a vehicle of that spirit, which we Pentecostals should be doing better than anyone else, and yet even we are clinging to the familiar paradigms of systematization and scholasticism, because we are so afraid. We are afraid of ourselves, in a sense, right? When we are set loose, or actually when we set the spirit loose. So I don't know. I think Pentecostalism has a lot to offer, but it is still struggling to gain its confidence, and is afraid of losing acceptance. And it is so widely, so broadly accepted today because it cannot be ignored. It's intellectual impossibility to ignore Pentecostal theology, right?
Yeah.
So we need more Pentecostal theology, but we need also theology done by the Spirit through us. I've spoken as a true mystic here,
Yeah.
right? Which I don't know if you exhausted your questions there, or is there more to them?
I have 2 more.
Okay, let's go through them.
Would you rather be able to talk with animals or speak all foreign languages?
Well, I speak a lot of foreign languages already. I'm compelled by Pentecost and the gift of interpretation. I don't know, Amy. I want animals to come to me as they came to Christ after the temptation in the wilderness, without fear. And I don't want to be afraid of them. And I want at the same time to understand all others. So I don't think this should be either or. I think love casts out all fear from anyone.
Let's do both then. That sounds good.
Let's do both.
All right, last speed round question. What's the most significant book in theology in the last 50 years from your perspective? I know that's a big decision.
That's a huge decision. I don't think I can single one.
Well, you can pick one.
Yes, I think people will be also upset with me.
No.
But I have to say, in public theology, I believe I'll mention two titles for different reasons, but though similar. The one is, of course, Exclusion and Embrace of Miroslav Volf.
Yes. By
But
Miroslav, yeah.
the other one brought me to tears. It wasn't Miroslav's book that brought me to tears, though I absolutely love that book. It was Jonathan Sacks' To Heal a Fractured World.
Yeah.
Yeah, the ethics of responsibility. That's something that we have to talk more in theology
Yes.
about.
Oh, that's a good one. Oh, that's a good one. Thank you for mentioning that one. I just have a couple more questions. I want to go back to your book for a moment. One of the things I so deeply appreciated about your book, that talks about so many difficult things and shares with such difficult context, the discussion of forgiveness in chapter 4 is so rich and so convicting. I was especially taken with your linking of the possibility of forgiveness as inseparable from God's omnipresence. That was really interesting to me. And how you say forgiveness is an act of the Spirit, an act of ontological healing and renewal of creation, overturning the curse's enmity between God's creatures. I'm just going to read a slightly longer quote here, and then I'm just going to invite you to respond to that and ask you that question of how have you seen forgiveness at work? Where have you seen God's Spirit made visible and tangible? And if you have an example. So to give context to that question, I'll read this quote. The Spirit empowers and magnifies the liberating voice of truth, both in the outcries of the victims and the confessions of the perpetrators, and mediates the embrace of the other toward inner and intersocial healing and freedom. Therefore, authentic forgiveness and reconciliation, wherever found, are manifestations of the Spirit's unceasing, redemptive, socio-transformative work of mending the world and transfiguring humanity into the likeness of its Maker. Since one of the marks of the Spirit's work is the building of just covenantal community, the countercultural, counterintuitive nature of gifting forgiveness to the other makes the invisible Spirit visible and tangibly embodied within human communal existence. The Spirit renews the face of God and humanity and makes it visible in the face of the other. So I'd love to hear you just expand on the work of the Spirit and forgiveness.
So, I am convinced that the work of forgiveness is on the forefront of the work of the Spirit in the world, because the Spirit brings the one of the functions in the agency, in the world mending agency of the Spirit, is to bring all of creation into one Spirit community. In the community of the Spirit is the community of all flesh. And therefore, the Spirit joins us to one another. But in the body, in the communal body of Christ, which is the church, where we have former enemies becoming brothers and sisters, and that also demands a process of forgiveness and reconciliation, but also bringing all of creation into that communal body, eventually into that communal body. So in one, the world at the end of time being one grand macro anthropos, the communal body of Christ who is all in all. Therefore, the whole world is theotic, and that's one of the brilliant points in Eastern Orthodox, in the Eastern Orthodox vision of salvation. Theosis does not extend just to humanity; it extends to all of creation.
Yes.
And here, so all of the work of the Spirit is reconciliation. Salvation has been described, world mending, redemption have been described in terms of reconciliation, and that on the upfront of that is forgiveness. So this is a centerpiece to the work of the Spirit in the world, to the way in which we experience redemption. Forgiveness and reconciliation is a fundamental mode in which we are able to embrace the other, including our enemy, as someone who believes God has deposited in our care for safekeeping. And Pentecost, going to Pentecost, is a hermeneutical key to unlocking the work, this understanding of the work of the Spirit, of making harmony out of difference, that in the eruption of that capacious polyphony of Pentecost, the voice of the other doesn't come as something threatening. It comes as the good news of what God has accomplished for humanity, and it is given in all these languages as a common good for all. And speaking about language as hospitality, that tricky question about language of humans or speaking with animals. You know what I do with my engagement with continental philosophy, particularly Derrida and Levinas, who see language as hospitality. Derrida pointing out that the mother tongue is the motherland of the dispossessed, the refugees, the strangeless, the stateless, the nomads, the immigrants. And when they hear the mother tongue spoken to them far away from their motherland, they find themselves immediately at home.
Yes.
So in that sense, I see the event of Pentecost as the moment in which God welcomes all humanity. The Spirit welcomes in the life of God all humanity on the surface of the earth in their mother tongue as their motherland. So they belong together. They're the household of God. As Desmond Tutu says, among humanity, God has no enemies, only family. And the Spirit opens their eyes to see that, to hear it proclaimed. This recovered sense of mutual belonging comes forth as an assertion of the nearness and the essentiality of the nearness of the other. And that's a heavy history of empires, of bloodshed that is addressed by the Spirit there. Building understanding, building mutual understanding, in rewriting the history of the world as history of forgiveness and reconciliation. And of course, in the Eastern Orthodox, Pentecost stretches from origin to eschaton. Bulgakov giving us this brilliant vision of the Spirit hovering over creation in the act of creation as what he calls the first cosmic Pentecost by anticipation. And then going through the entire Christ event, from the Spirit descending upon the Virgin Mary as the Pentecost of the Virgin, and on to the baptism of Jesus in water and the upper room, and stretches to the eschaton. We're being reminded, including the God breathing the Spirit in the nostrils of humanity, which I take as an affirmation that from the beginning humanity is created to be a charismatic creature, to be a spirit bearer, because the prototype and the telos of humanity is Christ, the Spirit bearer. So it takes a charismatic creature, therefore, to be the image of the invisible God in the cathedral of the cosmos. So it means that from the beginning, every speckle of dust, including the human bodies, everything is made to be joined to the Spirit, and therefore to one another, to be joined as one grand cosmic community of the Spirit, as a communal body of Christ. In other words, everything is made for Pentecost.
Yes.
So,
That's lovely. What a vision. What good news God has gifted us. If you could say just briefly, what are you working on now?
well, a lot of things, many pieces, because you know how it is with us. People give us various tasks to do. And
Yes.
we are doing. I'm working on a pneumatology on the Nicene Constantinopolitan Creed for a
Ooh.
special issue of the journal, the International Journal of Systematic Theology. But the long-term project is, besides the liturgical pneumatology of Alexander Schmemann, kind of the father of contemporary liturgical theology, I'm working on hopefully what will become a book on the economics of the spirit and spirituality of sustainability.
Ooh. Very cool.
So I have written, as you know, a lot on economics.
Hmm.
I have a bachelor's in master's in economics. So after studying theology, I was thinking, why did I do all of that? And suddenly it found its redemption. God has a way to redeem everything, right? So I'm particularly interested in sustainability. And you know, when we were speaking a while ago about the animals coming without fear, and you gave this beautiful reminder of the beauty of creation as a testimony of God, who is goodness and beauty and truth, right? That beauty that will save the world, according to Dostoevsky. I'm also reminded that not only we devour creation, creatures devour one another also to stay alive, and there is a lot of bloodshed going around. And here I like the realism of the prophets, the Old Testament prophets, who account for all of that. But then they give us this eschatological vision of a creation in a stage of shalom, where no one is gaining life by predatory consumption of the other, neither the animals nor humanity. And so I have to hold on to that vision, and seeing also the contributions of the so-called new economics school of circular economies or donut economies, whatever you want to call them, and the transition from competition to collaboration as the more productive way of providing what is needed, but lacking for the flourishing of all, not just of selected few, including all of creation. I'm also compelled that we need an articulation of spirituality, of sustainability, because as Desmond Tutu points out, for social transformation to take place, we need a spirituality of transformation, and boy, don't we need a spirituality of transformation in relation to ecological sustainability, ecological accountability.
Wow. I look forward to all that. What a delight it was to talk with you today, Daniela. I really enjoyed our conversation.
And vice versa. Thank you, Amy. Thank you so very much. It was truly enjoyable, delightful.
This is your host, Amy Hughes, with OnScript. We've been enjoying a conversation today with Daniela Augustine, reader in World Christianity and Pentecostal Studies at the University of Birmingham in the UK, and professor at Lee University. Daniela's book, The Spirit of the Common Good, Shared Flourishing in the Image of God, is published by Eerdmans. You can find links to the books we talked about on their website, onscript.study. Thank you for joining me today, friends.
You've been listening to OnScript, delectable conversations on scripture and theology. If this episode has brought you inner peace or lit your biblical fire, please consider a small donation of just $2 or $5 per month. Information on how to donate can be found at onscript.study/donate.